It was early evening when the parking lot lights hit the pavement outside of Best Buy in Fort Lauderdale, while a dark sedan rolled slowly through rows of parked cars like somebody searching. Doors cracked open, shots burst out fast, people dropped bags and sprinted for cover, while cameras later showed confusion spreading across West Sunrise Boulevard. Nobody in that moment knew the names behind it, yet detectives would later say this shooting was connected to something older, something already boiling across Broward County. Long before headlines caught up, one rapper had already built the name heavy enough that people whispered it like a warning, and that name would soon carry a nickname nobody could ignore: the Devil. To understand how that name started ringing across South Florida, you have to pull back into a pocket of Hollywood called Liberia, a small neighborhood wedged between highways, warehouses, and overlooked streets. Liberia sits west of the beach cities tourists know, boxed in near I-95 and rail lines, where older houses lean against auto shops and empty lots that rarely change. Folks who grew up there describe a place where everybody knew each other's families, yet opportunity stayed thin, leaving young kids watching the streets closely for direction. In that tight environment during the early 2000s, Sigmund Brown came up surrounded by people trying to survive with whatever hustle they could manage. Records later pulled by reporters showed Brown getting arrested young, starting with burglary and grand theft charges around 18 years old, which already placed his name inside local police databases. A few years after that first case, another arrest tied him to selling cocaine, which showed he had already crossed into real street business before most people knew his face. Those early charges did not bring long prison stretches, yet they marked him as someone moving fast through Broward County's underground circles. People who knew him from Liberia would later say he had ambition early, the type that made him restless even when consequences started stacking. Around that same time, music started becoming another lane he leaned into, recording songs while still hanging around Liberia blocks that shaped his reputation. He picked up the rap name Liberia Sig, tying himself directly to the neighborhood so nobody would question where he came from. In local studios scattered across Hollywood and Hallandale, he started putting out tracks that blended street stories with personal bragging, slowly building attention beyond his immediate circle. That early music did not make him famous, yet it gave him a voice that traveled further than word of mouth ever could. As those songs spread through YouTube uploads and phone shares, his identity started blending two worlds, one foot planted in rap culture, while the other stayed rooted in Liberia's street politics. Younger kids around Grand Street began repeating his lyrics, while older heads noticed how he carried himself like someone planning bigger moves. By the late 2010s, people close to him say he was not moving alone anymore, since friendships from Liberia and nearby Dania Beach started tightening into something more organized. Nobody called it a gang yet, though small alliances were already forming quietly around him, setting the stage for something that would soon carry a name everyone in Broward County learned. Those early alliances slowly turned into a circle that stretched beyond Liberia, pulling in friends from Dania Beach, Hallandale corridors, and blocks where older crews had already left their footprints. Many of those connections trace back to the Dania Hot Boys, a group that had been active since the early 2000s, made up of men already seasoned by years of street survival. Younger faces like Sig grew up watching those older crews, learning how neighborhood loyalty worked before building their own version of it. Over time, that generational overlap created a natural pipeline where younger members started forming their own identity under familiar shadows. By the late 2010s, the loose friendships began tightening into something people around Liberia started recognizing as a unit, especially around Grand Street, where many of them hung out daily. Grand Street was not famous outside Hollywood, yet inside that small grid, it became a symbolic base where cars parked deep into nights and conversations stretched for hours. Around those corners, the name Grand Mafia began floating, first as a joke among friends, then gradually as something said more seriously. The title carried ambition, hinting at influence beyond a single block, which matched how the group started moving. Unlike older crews that tried staying low, this younger circle leaned toward visibility, mixing street presence with online attention that grew through music clips and Instagram lives. Liberia Sig songs gave them a soundtrack, while local buzz made their name travel faster than traditional word of mouth ever could. Detectives later said that by 2020, Grand Mafia members were already appearing in shooting reports scattered across Hollywood and Hallandale Beach. None of those early cases alone drew major headlines, yet together they formed a pattern that law enforcement quietly started tracking. At the same time, Broward County's geography made everything tighter, since Liberia sat only minutes from Hallandale Beach, while Lauderdale stretched just west along quick highway routes. That closeness meant rival crews crossed paths, often, especially with Zone 10 rooted in Hallandale and Lauderdale, building identity in Lauderdale neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Dania Beach factions still overlapped loyalties, creating situations where alliances felt fluid depending on the day or the block. With so many groups living within short drives, tensions naturally grew, especially once music disses began slipping into real street confrontations. By the end of that period, what started as neighborhood friendships had turned into something structured enough that people across Broward began recognizing the Grand Mafia name. Rap videos carried subtle shots at rivals, while online comments hinted at deeper grudges forming behind screens. Older residents would later say that was the moment everything began shifting, when music stopped sounding like entertainment and started echoing real conflict. From there, the line separating lyrics from reality began thinning, setting the foundation for a war that would soon spill beyond neighborhoods into headlines nobody could ignore. As Grand Mafia started gaining attention around Broward County, the tension that would define everything later did not explode overnight. It built slowly through insults that first lived in whispers. One of the names that kept surfacing in those early rumors was Whiz the Wizard, a Hallandale Beach rapper tied to the Zone 10 circle and gaining traction through street music. Stories started floating that the beef had personal roots, including talk that Whiz had crossed lines with someone close to Sig, which made the tension feel deeper than neighborhood rivalry. None of those claims were ever fully confirmed in court, yet in street spaces, perception carried weight, and perception alone could spark real consequences. That tension spilled onto social media, where Instagram posts and short videos started carrying coded jabs that only locals fully understood. Subtle captions turned into sneak disses, then those disses became louder once followers began sharing clips across Miami and Broward timelines. People who once handled problems quietly now confront conflicts in front of thousands, turning private disrespect into a public spectacle. That shift mattered, since every insult now had an audience that kept score in real time. Around that same window, another name began gaining attention in the feud's orbit: Psycho Bob, a Zone 10 rapper known for aggressive lyrics and unapologetic delivery. His music leaned heavily into diss culture, calling out rivals directly in songs that spread across YouTube and local parties. When tracks started mocking Grand Mafia and throwing personal insults into hooks, the tone changed from competition into humiliation. Music stopped being background noise and became a direct weapon aimed at reputations. Law enforcement would later point to October 2020 as one of the earliest signs that lines had already been crossed, when Sig was accused of orchestrating an attempted hit targeting Psycho Bob's mother. The attack did not end in a killing, yet the allegation alone showed how far the conflict had already drifted from typical street disputes. Families had traditionally stayed outside gang politics, Yet now parents were being mentioned in police reports tied to retaliation plots. That moment quietly signaled that whatever rules once existed were fading fast. Meanwhile, the internet kept pouring fuel on everything, with Instagram Lives capturing arguments that used to stay on corners instead of screens. Young viewers watched these exchanges unfold like episodes, repeating catchphrases and sharing clips that spread tensions further. Every live stream or diss video pulled more attention to the conflict, which only made stepping back harder for anyone involved. By the time 2021 started, the feud no longer felt like isolated beef between rappers. It had grown into something larger, something where pride kept pushing people toward decisions they could not rewind. The feud crossed a new threshold on March 19, 2021, when Misty Hopkins was shot and killed outside her small business in Hollywood during broad daylight. Misty was not a rapper or a known street figure. She was the mother of Grand Mafia member HMT Trey, which made the killing feel deeply personal from the start. Witnesses told police a vehicle pulled up, shots rang out quickly, then the car disappeared before most people understood what had happened. By the time first responders arrived, a community business owner was gone, leaving shock that stretched far beyond the usual circles touched by gang violence. Inside Grand Mafia circles, the emotional impact landed heavy, since losing a mother changed the way people talked about the conflict overnight. HMT Trey publicly mourned her, while friends flooded social media with tributes that mixed grief with anger. Vigils and posts honoring Misty quickly turned into promises that her death would not go unanswered. That emotional shift marked a turning point where sadness began blending with vows of retaliation. Rivals did not stay silent during that period, which only deepened the divide as online taunts started surfacing under memorial posts. Screenshots later circulated showing people mocking the tragedy, which made the loss feel even more disrespectful to those close to her. Those digital jabs amplified the pain, since grief was now unfolding in front of audiences who treated it like entertainment. What could have stayed a quiet mourning instead became public fuel. For longtime Broward residents, Misty Hopkins' killing shattered a boundary many thought still existed, since mothers had traditionally remained outside street wars. The idea that a parent could be targeted shifted how locals viewed the conflict, turning fear into something more immediate. Conversations in neighborhoods from Hollywood to Hallandale changed tone, with people realizing the feud had crossed into territory where no one felt truly safe. That realization lingered even among people far removed from the streets. In the months that followed, the atmosphere grew heavier as retaliation narratives started shaping how the conflict moved forward. Videos circulated showing disrespect at grave sites, while social media posts carried threats disguised as captions. Those moments suggested that revenge was no longer a reaction, but a mindset taking hold among younger members. As that mentality hardened, the tension kept climbing, building toward a larger explosion that would soon push the feud beyond local headlines into something the entire region would recognize. By late summer 2021, one name kept surfacing at the center of Broward's rising tension, and that was Whiz the Wizard, a young rapper from Hallandale Beach, gaining momentum fast. He was tied to Kodak Black's Sniper Gang, and songs like Super Gremlin remixes were starting to pull him into wider conversations beyond Florida. Locally, he carried influence through Zone 10 circles, blending music buzz with real street respect that made his presence impossible to ignore. That growing spotlight meant any harm involving him would travel far beyond neighborhood lines. Everything shifted on September 17, 2021, when his body was discovered early that morning in the front yard of a home in Hallandale Beach. Police reports said he had been shot elsewhere, then left there, turning the scene into something that felt staged for impact. Residents waking up to flashing lights found themselves staring at a moment that quickly turned into headlines across South Florida. Rumors spread almost immediately, including wild claims that his body had been mutilated, though investigators never confirmed those details. Reactions moved fast once the news broke, especially inside hip-hop spaces where Whiz had already built a following. Blogs, YouTube channels, and Instagram pages picked up the story within hours, pushing his name into national timelines. At the same time, clips began circulating online, showing people reacting in real time, including videos where individuals appeared to celebrate the killing. Those images created shock even among viewers used to violent rap narratives, since the tone felt colder than typical diss culture. As detectives started piecing things together, attention turned toward Grand Mafia figures, with allegations pointing toward HMT Trey as the shooter and Liberia Sig as someone closely tied to the aftermath. Investigators later referenced phone location data and social media behavior that seemed to place key figures near the scene. While legal proceedings would stretch over time, the court of public opinion moved much faster, shaping how people interpreted the killing. Online discussions began linking names long before trials ever began. That moment pushed the Broward conflict beyond local blocks, since Whiz the Wizard was not just another neighborhood figure, he was a rising rapper tied to a larger movement. Media outlets outside Florida picked up the story, introducing audiences across the country to names they had never heard before. With that attention came a wider spotlight on Liberia Sig, whose reputation began spreading far beyond Liberia or Hollywood streets. Even with all that visibility, the violence did not slow, and instead the headlines seemed to move alongside the chaos rather than stopping it. After Whiz the Wizard's death, the conflict did not freeze in one direction, since losses began landing inside Grand Mafia circles as well, deepening the emotional stakes. One of the names that surfaced during that stretch was Nathan Hillman, also known locally as Nate Rowe, a figure connected to the same network. He was killed on December 18, 2021, in a shooting that left details murky but emotions clear among those who knew him. His death reinforced the idea that retaliation was no longer hypothetical. It was already unfolding in real time. Not long after that, another loss hit closer to Sig's personal life when his cousin Jarvis Holton was gunned down on December 19, 2022. Reports said Holton was sitting in a car outside a girlfriend's place when shots came through the window, ending his life without warning. Losing someone tied by blood shifted the tone even further, since the conflict now lived inside family grief rather than distant alliances. People present at the funeral later described vows of payback echoing through quiet conversations and online posts. Each burial seemed to harden positions rather than soften them, since grief often translated into motivation within environments shaped by retaliation. Younger members watching these cycles began treating revenge as an expectation rather than a reaction, folding it into their sense of identity. That mindset fed into a loop where every loss created pressure to respond, keeping the conflict alive even when no one publicly admitted it. Over time, the emotional cost became part of how people defined loyalty. Around the same period, violence continued to touch rival sides, including the July 15, 2023 shooting of Wayne Smith, also known as Marlo Roy, a Zone 10 member, killed in Hallandale Beach. Prosecutors would later allege that Sig and another associate were involved, though legal battles would shape how those claims played out. The fact that the shooting happened in daylight added another layer of fear for residents, already exhausted by years of tension. Moments like that reinforced how visible the conflict had become to everyday people. By then, the pattern was clear to anyone watching closely, since every funeral fed the next list of names whispered in conversations across Broward. Losses were no longer isolated events, but links in a chain that kept tightening with time. Even those trying to step away found it difficult, since memories and expectations followed them into every new interaction. As that cycle kept spinning, the fallout began stretching beyond the people directly involved, setting the stage for tragedies that would soon reach innocent lives. As the back and forth kept escalating, the fallout stopped staying inside crews, and regular people living between Hollywood, Hallandale, and Lauderhill started feeling it firsthand. Residents began telling local reporters about stray bullets punching through walls, sometimes landing inside living rooms where families were just trying to eat dinner. One widely shared account involved an older woman hit in the arm while sitting on her porch, a reminder that distance from the streets no longer guaranteed safety. Those stories spread quietly at first, yet fear started building across neighborhoods that once treated shootings as distant noise. Children felt it too, since parents began teaching them what to do when gunfire cracked nearby, turning ducking low into an everyday instinct. Teachers in Broward schools later described students breaking down in class after nights filled with sirens and helicopters circling overhead. Non-fatal shootings kept piling up, including incidents outside laundromats and corner stores where people were simply running errands. Each close call added tension, making ordinary routines feel unpredictable. Neighbors across Liberia and Hallandale started changing how they moved, installing cameras, rushing home earlier, and warning kids not to linger outside after sunset. Conversations shifted from gossip about music to quiet concerns about survival, especially among families with younger children. Even people who once ignored the conflict began tracking updates online, trying to understand how close danger might land next. That steady anxiety created an atmosphere where every loud noise carried new weight. Then came January 20th, 2024, when violence spilled into a space few expected, the parking lot of a Best Buy on West Sunrise Boulevard. That night, 17-year-old Terrence Farrington, known as TJ Reloaded, had gone shopping for music equipment with friends. Prosecutors later said shooters opened fire believing they had spotted a rival named Color Money Red, yet they hit Farrington instead, turning a routine trip into a fatal mistake. Surveillance footage later showed panic spreading across the lot as people ran for cover, capturing a tragedy that spread quickly online. The Best Buy killing shifted how the wider public saw everything, since Farrington was viewed by many as a teenager caught in the wrong place rather than a central player. Sympathy surged across social media, with local outlets interviewing family members who described him as someone focused on music. Even fans who once treated the feud like distant drama began expressing discomfort, realizing the violence was reaching random spaces. That shift in perception mattered, since the story no longer belonged only to street circles. With the tension rising, pressure on authorities intensified as community voices grew louder in demanding action. News coverage expanded beyond local crime sections, framing the shooting as part of a broader pattern unfolding across Broward County. Law enforcement agencies began signaling that investigations were tightening, hinting that a larger response might be coming. By early 2024, the atmosphere carried a sense that the cycle could not keep running unchecked, setting the stage for a crackdown that felt increasingly inevitable. If the Best Buy shooting shook public perception, the killing that followed months earlier had already pushed the conflict into darker territory, especially after the death of Dorothy Smart. She was 68 years old, known in her community as a quiet grandmother and the mother of Zone 10 rapper Psycho Bob. On September 13, 2023, she drove to a home in Fort Lauderdale, parking in the driveway while waiting inside her van. What started as an ordinary evening quickly turned violent in a way that stunned even people familiar with Broward's long history of street conflicts. Witnesses later described a car pulling up before multiple shots rang out, leaving Smart fatally wounded inside the vehicle. The brazen nature of the attack, carried out in a residential area, sent shockwaves through neighborhoods far beyond the immediate scene. News of her death spread rapidly across Florida, dominating local broadcasts and social feeds within hours. For many watching, the brutality felt different from earlier killings that had stayed tied to younger men moving inside street circles. Symbolically, the killing hit harder than most, since targeting a grandmother stripped away whatever justification people once used to rationalize violence. Even longtime observers who had followed the feud closely struggled to process how far things had gone. Conversations shifted toward the idea that the conflict had lost all boundaries, since older family members were now in the crosshairs. That realization deepened the emotional weight surrounding the case. Community reactions reflected that shift, with vigils forming across Broward where pastors and residents gathered to speak out against the violence. Religious leaders publicly condemned the killing, calling it a breaking point for neighborhoods already exhausted by years of shootings. Even voices from street circles expressed discomfort, acknowledging privately that the attack had crossed a line few wanted associated with their communities. That rare consensus showed how deeply the moment resonated. Around that time, a nickname that had floated quietly before began sticking more firmly as media outlets and online commentators started calling Liberia Sig the devil of Broward County. The label captured a growing perception shaped by headlines and viral clips, turning a local figure into a symbol recognized across wider audiences. Each new article and social post reinforced that image, making it harder to separate rumor from documented allegations. By late 2023, pressure from law enforcement, media, and the public began tightening at once, signaling that the walls around the story were slowly closing in. By the time 2024 began, the tone around the case started shifting away from chaos towards something quieter, more methodical, as investigators worked behind the scenes, connecting years of scattered violence. Detectives across Broward County began stacking evidence piece by piece, treating each shooting like part of a larger puzzle rather than isolated events. Tools that rarely made headlines started playing bigger roles, including ballistic databases that linked shell casings across different crime scenes. Each match quietly tightened connections that had once looked disconnected. Technology added more layers, since systems like ShotSpotter helped pinpoint where gunfire happened within seconds, giving investigators clearer timelines than eyewitness accounts alone. Analysts compared those timestamps with cell tower records, mapping who was near specific shootings when they happened. That digital trail helped fill gaps where witnesses refused to talk, which had long slowed cases across Hollywood and Hallandale. Slowly, a pattern began emerging that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. One of the biggest breaks reportedly came from the Best Buy case, when a fingerprint recovered from a vehicle tied to the shooting pointed directly towards Sigmund Brown. That single piece of evidence gave detectives something concrete they could build outward from, revisiting older cases with fresh direction. Once investigators started lining up physical evidence with digital data, momentum shifted noticeably. What once felt like scattered incidents began resembling a single narrative. Prosecutors then leaned into a strategy built for patterns like this, preparing a racketeering case designed to frame the violence as an organized enterprise. Instead of chasing one shooting at a time, they worked to show how multiple crimes connected under a broader structure. That approach allowed them to tie different suspects together through shared actions and alliances. It also raised the stakes dramatically for everyone involved. By mid to late 2024, coordinated raids began unfolding across Hollywood, Dania Beach, and Fort Lauderdale, bringing arrests that stacked quickly. Several Grand Mafia members were taken into custody in waves, including figures investigators had been tracking for years. When charges were finally announced, they included multiple murders and attempted murders, all wrapped into a sweeping RICO indictment. With life sentences now on the table, Sig found himself facing a legal system that had been building quietly long before the headlines caught up. As the legal case took shape, another story kept growing alongside it, one shaped less by court filings and more by rumor, speculation, and internet mythology. Online forums and social media threads started pushing claims that Liberia Sig was responsible for more than 20 bodies, numbers that spread quickly despite limited verification. Memes and comment sections turned those figures into a kind of folklore, blurring lines between confirmed facts and street exaggeration. Over time, the mythology became almost as influential as documented evidence. Part of that legend came from the persona that followed him through headlines, especially the nickname Devil of Broward County, which gained traction after high-profile killings. Social media clips showing dark imagery and taunting captions reinforced that branding, creating an image that felt larger than the individual himself. Fear amplified the reputation, since stories traveled faster when people believed they were talking about someone unstoppable. In that environment, perception often moved quicker than truth, yet the narrative never stayed one-dimensional, since people who grew up around Liberia sometimes described a different version of Sig entirely. Some neighbors recalled moments where he helped families with bills or gave money to kids during holidays, memories that complicated the darker image dominating media coverage. That split perception created a strange duality where one community saw a monster while another remembered someone more familiar. The contrast made the story harder to pin down cleanly. Beyond Broward streets, the ripple effects reached Florida's rap scene, where artists began distancing themselves from any association tied to the conflict. Promoters grew cautious, venues tightened security, and industry figures spoke more openly about the risks of street feuds spilling into music spaces. The debate around using rap lyrics as courtroom evidence also gained attention, raising questions about where art ends and confession begins. As trials approached, uncertainty lingered around how those arguments might shape outcomes. For now, the future remains unsettled, with courtrooms expected to decide what parts of the legend stand against hard evidence. What feels clear already is how quickly personal conflicts can expand into something that touches entire communities, reshaping neighborhoods long after headlines fade. The story of Liberia Sig sits in that uneasy space between myth and record, reminding people how fast cycles of pride and retaliation can spiral beyond control. Long after verdicts arrive, the impact on Broward County will likely echo in ways that numbers alone cannot fully explain.